answer to the question, what does it cost to sail around the world? Most cruisers will say to you, how long's a piece of string? Now that's not really very useful to anyone, so we are going to try and think about it a little bit more carefully. I'm really hoping that by working through all these ideas and these bits and pieces I've jotted down, that you'll use them to formulate some kind of the beginning of a budget for your cruising plans. But I'm absolutely convinced that there will be things that I've written down that you don't agree with, or things that I've completely omitted and forgotten. So if you think of anything that I haven't mentioned, please put it in the comments below.
Yes, and I am lurking behind the camera, so I will butt in if I think of anything.
He will butt in, you can be assured of that. So one of the things I need to say first of all, these are the things you need to consider when you're looking at planning your budget. So firstly, the size and the value of your sailboat is probably the most important thing to think about. What are you going to spend on the sailboat? Secondly, repair and maintenance, both of which you will have to consider even though it might be a brand new boat. Thirdly, the cruising ground, and this really is important. At the moment, if you watch us regularly, you'll know we've been in Southeast Asia since 2013. Before that, we were in India. So that's 10 years sailing in one of the cheaper parts of the world when you compare it to the Mediterranean or the US or some of the Western countries. Fourthly, is the style of living. Are you going to be eating out? Are you going to be doing loads of expeditions on land? Are you going to be spending lots of money on things? So those are the 4 things that are going to affect your budget. I'm going to try and put it into 3 basic costs. So there are fixed costs, there are variable costs, 2 types, and there are living costs, and that's what we're going to look at right now. I'm going to start off with fixed costs, and obviously the first one is the cost of your boat. It's a finite amount of money. Most people start off knowing how much they're going to spend on their boat, or they have a ballpark. We have a whole episode on how to buy a boat in which you can find out a lot more detail. But for now, let's just say, whatever your budget is, try not to go right up, try not squeeze right to the top. Keep some of it back, because inevitably there will be costs that you haven't thought about at the time. And if you've used all your budget on the purchase of your boat, you've got nothing left over. Talk a bit more about that in detail later on, but that's your first fixed cost, the budget for your boat.
We do normally say hold back at least 20 to 25%, don't we?
Yeah, that's the rule of thumb, is hold 20% back for inevitable changes and unseen expenses that will occur after you've bought your boat. And to be honest with you, I would say this is true for new boats as well, wouldn't you? I mean, unless you're getting a boat made specifically to your requirements, has got all the additions that you want, inevitably, I think if you're going to go cruising, there are things that you may want to put on your boat that aren't on that brand new boat. Things will go wrong, and hopefully the warranty will sort that out for you, but just be prepared to keep some extras back. Our boat, Esper, she's a 1989 Oyster 435. We bought her in 2004 for the princely sum of £75,000. That's sterling. That's what she cost. We didn't have a mortgage on the boat. We bought her outright, so we haven't got to worry about repayments on any kind of funding for the boat, and that's something that you may have to consider if you're not going to buy your boat outright. We paid for a full survey of Esper before we bought her, because we were newbies. We'd never had a boat between us before. It was brand new to us, and we knew there were things probably that would be wrong with her that we would never be able to spot. So we paid for a full survey. Now this was back in 2004. I don't have the records anywhere for what we paid. One thing we have learned over the years is that surveyors vary enormously in quality and price. So wherever you're going to buy your boat, really shop around to find a good surveyor, ask other people, get recommendations. But if it's your first boat, then really do get a survey. It's worth its weight in gold. And it can help you negotiate on the price. If there are things that really do need a lot of work, you can perhaps knock those off the price. Worth thinking about. The next thing I've got in fixed costs is insurance. Some of you may disagree, because we do know of cruisers who don't insure their boats, and that's their right. However, it's going to get more and more difficult to have a boat that's not insured, because countries are starting to require it when you arrive there. When we first came to this part of the world, we were never asked for an insurance certificate, but now if you're going to Thailand, Malaysia or Indonesia, they all want to see your insurance. And you pretty much, as long as you have third-party liability, you should be okay. You don't have to go for the fully comprehensive, but you really should consider that you will be needing some kind of insurance. Now, we insure with Panasonic. We have fully comprehensive for the whole boat, for the full value of the boat, and we pay, let me just check my notes, yeah, we pay £1,945 per year to insure Esper. This varies, this will vary around the world, and obviously it varies from boat to boat, depends what the value of your boat is, and just as importantly, it depends where you're going to cruise. At the moment we're covered, and I'll read out the latitudes and longitudes: 26 degrees north and 10 degrees south, 78 degrees west and 160 degrees east. We're insured for that entire cruising ground at the moment, except for the Straits of Malacca for piracy, and between certain months of the year, between certain latitudes, for named tropical storms. So it will affect when we go to the Philippines, because they do get tropical zones, tropical storms there. So we've got to think a bit carefully about when we go over there. The Malacca Strait, to be honest with you, we've been up and down the Malacca Strait for the last 6 years. I've never known any yacht have any kind of trouble. It tends to be really big ships, but most insurance companies won't insure you for that particular stretch of water. Some of you have asked us about health insurance over the years, and to be honest, we don't have it. We've never had it. We did look into it when we first bought Esper, when we were in the Mediterranean. We looked into health insurance, but it was really difficult to find anything that would cover us as cruisers, as long-term, permanent, liveaboard cruisers. There's all kinds of insurance for holidaymakers and travellers, but we're so specialised on a boat that at that stage there was very little available, and what we could find was expensive. It may well have changed, because that was 14 years ago. So if you know of any health insurance that you would recommend for cruisers anywhere in the world, let us know in the comments. We'd be really interested to know what you know. The other thing we've got to think about is that we are heading east, which means we're going towards the US. And the information we've received from lots of places is that in the US we really do need to have some kind of health insurance, because we don't want to end up going into hospital and ending up possibly with very high bills. So when we're starting to head to the US, we'll probably ask you again to come up with ideas for health insurance for the US. Yes, sir?
It is just worth mentioning that we can kind of get away with it here, because the healthcare, certainly in Thailand and Malaysia, is excellent.
Yes.
Really first class healthcare here. There are always hospitals in every single town, and every single hospital we've been to has been superb.
Number 3 on the fixed costs is AIS, although this is somewhat debatable. When we first started with AIS in 2009, not many cruising boats had it, but over the years it's becoming more the norm, and certainly in Thailand, when you check in, they want your MMSI number and they want to see you on AIS, so it's worth thinking about. I think in Langkawi we were asked for AIS, but you're not quite so sure about that.
Yeah, I think it does depend on the port authorities in each area, but yes, as you say, it is becoming more and more popular now.
We would say that AIS is something that you should have anyway, because it's really useful for navigation, and we have a whole piece on that. We'll link down in the description. So AIS, think about it. Personally, I would have it as a fixed cost. We have an XP6000 by Vespa. It's a transponder, so we transmit and we receive, and that costs around about $600 new. When you buy your boat, it has to be registered. It may already be registered elsewhere, or you may choose to re-register it in a new country, but you cannot get into any country unless your boat is registered somewhere. In the UK, boat registration is not just a one-off payment. You have to renew it every 5 years. We have an SSR which costs us £35 every 5 years. If you go really posh and go for the Part 3, it's £135 every 5 years. And finally, fixed costs you need to think about. Again, it depends on where you're going to cruise, but sometimes you have to pay for a cruising permit in the waters you intend to sail, and sometimes you have to pay for visas and other clearance fees. This varies from country to country. For instance, in Myanmar, to cruise in those waters, it is so prohibitively expensive we weren't able to do it. In the Maldives, it was about £1,500 when we were there in 2013 to cruise the waters of Maldives up to a maximum of 3 months. But it was the same price if you were there for 2 weeks or 3 months. So we stayed for the 3 months, which was around about $500 a month, which we reckoned was worth it. Visas can be charged. Yeah, in fact, they quite often are charged, particularly if you get them beforehand. You usually have to go to an embassy, pay for a visa. Sometimes you pay on arrival, sometimes you don't, sometimes it's free. All of this information can be found out online if you go to Noon's site or the embassy, preferably of the country concerned. The next one is variable costs, and I've broken this down into regular and additional. It's just my way of doing it, and it just helps me think through all the things I've got to talk about. So, number one, regular variable costs. First off, haul out. For hull inspection, you'll need to do this regularly if you have any kind of vessel in the water, because the sea kills boats. You'll have to think about anti-fouling and how often you're going to do that. You need to inspect all the through hull fittings, the numerous other jobs that involve having to get the boat out of the water. So you need to think about how much that's going to cost, if you're going to stay on the boat, or if you're going to pay additional amounts of money to stay on land in a flat or apartment or hotel or whatever it is, and all the costs that go with that. Obviously, the bigger the boat, rather like a marina, the more expensive it will be to haul it out and to keep it on the hard. And a word to the wise, try and haul out every year if you can. Really getting to grips with what's going on underneath the waterline can save you money. It might delay problems, or it might even stop problems happening in the first place. We had a real problem with Esper because we weren't able to haul her for nearly 4 years, and 3 years in brackish water in India really did not do the hull any good at all. We had osmosis over the entire hull. So when we finally hauled out properly in Thailand after a quick haul out in the Maldives, we were on the hard for a year. We did choose to do a total refit. If anyone's watched our videos, they'll have seen it. And we ended up spending £65,000. That's not what you'll have to do necessarily, but if you don't look after your boat, you could end up spending a lot more money each time you haul out than you think you would like to. Replacement parts, you'll need to budget for this. Difficult to say how much you'll spend every year because it varies, but expect every time you haul out to have to get hold of parts, which of course may be difficult and you may have to wait for them. Again, the bigger the boat, potentially the more expensive this can be, because the parts may be bigger and they are usually more expensive if they're bigger. And if you've got a catamaran, sometimes you've got twice as many things as we have on monohulls. Things to think about. New engine. Okay, none of us wants to think about a new engine because they're supposed to last a long time, but ours didn't. Eventually ours gave up completely and we had to get a new one. And the expense involved in that was not only the engine itself, it was a Beta 60 at around £8,000, which we had to ship from the UK. But while we waited for it, we stayed in a marina, so there were marina costs too. And when it comes to repair and maintenance, are you going to do it yourself? Most cruisers do as much as they can themselves on board, but sometimes you may want to get a specialist involved for those really tricky things that you just are not quite so sure about. So you'll have to think about how much that's going to cost. Now over here in Southeast Asia, the cost of labour is not a lot. So we often use local people to do quite a bit of our work. Not only is it not so expensive, but it also means that we're helping the local economy and we're giving these guys work and paying them for it. And on replacement parts, it's not just boat equipment, it's all the things that you use in the boat. Laptops, phones, cameras, all of those things, they do not do well in marine environment. Do expect that you will be replacing those more often than you normally do. Rigging. Most insurance companies, as a rule of thumb, expect you to change your rigging every 10 years. Some boats do a lot of hard sailing in 10 years and some just do the odd weekend. And I think sometimes the insurance company will take that view. Certainly with Pantaenius, we got a rigging inspection and we're able to keep our current rigging past its 10-year date. But when we bought Esper in 2004, we weren't really sure of the state of the rigging. It was looked at when we had the survey, but by 2009 we decided to completely change the whole rigging. So she was re-rigged completely from scratch in 2009 with really good quality stainless from Oyster, which we had shipped out to us in Turkey. Your tender and your outboard, that's your car, that's what you get around in a lot, and things can happen. They can get stolen, they can give up the ghost, they can break, they're all kind, you can just lose them. So imagine that you're going to have to replace those at least once every, I don't know, 6 years. just grasping that out of the air. But yeah, they can both go wrong and you may have to replace both. Our tender is in our insurance policy, is covered, but it's most unlikely if we were to lose it that we would claim, because it will just shoot the premium right up. I can't really see the point of doing that. Sails, like the rigging, they don't last forever, but at least the insurance company won't require you to change them every 10 years. That's up to you. So with careful maintenance and a good eye, you should know when it's time to get rid of the old sails and bring some new ones in. We did this in 2017. We changed the 4 sails of Esper. As you know, she's a ketch, and that came to £6,650 for new sails. In 2018 we added a code 0, but that of course meant adding a furler as well, so we had to pay for a furler and a code 0. Together that was around about $3,000. Life raft and other safety equipment. Life rafts don't last forever. You should get them serviced according to the service manual with your life raft, and you need to have a good look at it when it's done if you can. We saw a friend of ours open up his life raft in Satun in Thailand, and it was shredded inside. It wouldn't have done any good at all. So we took the plunge and bought a new life raft in 2018. It's a Viking 4-man ocean-going life raft, and that cost £1,950. It needs to be serviced regularly. I think every 3 years we're supposed to service it. All safety equipment needs to be maintained, serviced and replaced regularly. Depends what it is, but you've got things like obviously your life vest, your lifelines, the fire extinguishers. There's so many safety things on a boat, and they really have to work properly, and it's up to you to keep them maintained. In fact, with an insurance policy, they will expect to see that you've got a certain number of fire extinguishers and that they are up to date. Oh, flares as well, of course. Batteries. Batteries will need to be replaced. Well, most batteries do need to be replaced. We've had various types of batteries over the years, and they've done quite well, but we really went large at the end of 2018 and we put an entirely new lithium system in the boat. That came to the grand total of £5,500, but we felt it was something that we were ready for. Go on.
Yes, that £5,500 does include the 3 kilowatt inverter. It includes a BMS system. It also includes an additional magic box, which is going to step down the voltage to 110 when we get to the States as well. So that wasn't just the battery setup. It was well worth it though. Yes,
it was. And we also paid for installation. So you did it together, didn't you? Yeah, that was worth it. That's a huge outlay. You might want to do that at the beginning, or you may want to do it later on. Finally, in regular variable costs, there are things like diesel, petrol, gas, all of those things, and they vary in price considerably around the world. It'll be up to you how much you use each of those things. So once you know where you're going to cruise, work that out and put it in your budget. Additional variable costs. These are things that you don't have to have on your boat, but you may want to have on your boat. They might be either for making your sailing better or for making your living conditions better. And in no particular order, I'm just going to read them out here. Radar, water maker, solar panels, autopilot, washing machine, wind vane self-steering, aircon, folding bikes. We have most of those things, and I think, Jamie, you will probably want to say something on radar. We don't see it as an additional variable cost. We see it as absolutely
essential.
Essential.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also say solar panels are essential, because when you start to cruise, you'll realise how important the topic of power is. Powering all those things you've got on your boat, you really need to think of ways in which you're going to do that. We use solar panels pretty efficiently. Some people use wind generators as well. a water maker, I could not live without a water maker. I can do without a washing machine, but I can't do without a water maker. We can have showers whenever we like.
Yeah, just on the subject of water makers are expensive. And in fact, our water maker that we bought almost 10 years ago now cost us £4,000. The same water maker is now £6,000. So it's a huge investment. Well worth it though. It really adds to your independence on the water.
Yes, particularly in areas where you're very, very remote and there aren't people. As long as you're sailing where there are people, you can usually pretty much get hold of water if you're prepared to go back and forth with canisters and fill it up. So places like the Red Sea, where there was nobody, we were able to shower the whole time without any kind of problem and drink as much as we liked. And the same thing in the Anambas, and the same thing in the Western Islands off Sumatra, where there was nothing, there was nobody. So it extends your cruising just as long as you like, really.
I think a lot of the costs that you are talking about do exactly that. It's about comfort. And for us, the increase in size of the solar panels with the lithium batteries, and of course the water maker, these for us are now essential because they make our lives on board so much more comfortable, but they all involve a very big initial setup cost.
Yeah, they do. So you need to think about whether you're going to put that in your fixed costs at the beginning as part of your boat purchase, or whether you're going to use that 20% to spend on some of these things. They are massive, they are big, as Jamie says. Finally, in the costs is living costs. Now this is really where you can make a big impact on how your budget works, because some months we spend no money at all, especially when we're off into these very remote places. There's nowhere to spend money. We've done all the provisioning beforehand and we're on our own. So that's really nice because that's absolutely free. Other times we have to be in a marina. We're either waiting for important deliveries. We can't move the boat because we've got problems, mechanical problems, no engine or whatever it might be. And obviously recently in the lockdown, we were stuck in the marina for 4 months and we had to pay full price for that. So think about that. Living expenses you can affect, except when there's a world crisis, of course. So a little bit more detail. Let's just look at a few points to take into consideration. I've already said marinas, obviously very expensive to stay in marinas. Budget for it or don't do it. Excursions. A lot of us are going around the world because we want to go to countries we've never seen before and we want to learn all we can about that country. You can learn a lot just from shore, but you can learn a lot more by going inland and exploring. And that's going to cost things. You've got to keep your boat somewhere safe while you go inland. And then you've got to pay to get there and to stay there. So put something in the budget for doing those excursions. In some cases you may actually want to fly inland. In Southeast Asia it's quite difficult to sail in places like Vietnam and Cambodia, so most cruisers will take a flight and they'll go around and do a travel tour on land. And I mentioned it before, but are you going to be eating and drinking on land? Or are you going to be eating and drinking on your boat? You can halve your budget by doing it yourself. Something that we often forget is that a lot of us will return home or certainly want to go and visit our families while we're cruising around the world. Clearly, the further away you are from them, the longer it takes to get there and the more expensive it is. You may say, well, I don't intend to. It's not my plan to go home. Supposing something happens, some kind of emergency happens and you have to get home, you need something in your budget, you need some savings somewhere that will allow you to get yourself back home and to pay for your boat to be looked after while you're not there, and also to pay for your living expenses when you go back home. I'd say try and do that, say, for once a year. Have that in the budget that you'll be going back and forth at least once a year. So that's just a lengthy list of some of the things to think about before you start to come up with your own cruising budget.
Top tip, don't spend your first year cruising as if you're on a merry holiday. That's exactly what we did, and we spanked all our cash going out every single night, getting rotten drunk and eating out in fancy restaurants, making new friends. It was great fun, but we caned all our money.
So try and stick to your monthly income. It's really important. And the whole business of a monthly income, well, that I think is another Q&A and we'll address that in the future. Beep, 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 beep. No, fuck off. Pause.